I paid every bill from my pension so my son and his wife lacked nothing. Then he believed his wife's lies and told me to pack my bags. Neither of them knew what would happen the moment I walked away. I want to tell you about the day my son pointed at me in front of his entire family and called me a thief. But if I only told you that part, you wouldn't understand anything. You wouldn't understand the 6 years before it. You wouldn't understand why I didn't argue. You wouldn't understand what was sitting in my kitchen drawer the whole time, the thing that would end up costing my son everything he thought he had. And you definitely wouldn't understand the second secret, the one that wasn't mine. The one that meant my son hadn't just married a woman who lied. He'd married a woman who had done this exact thing before. My name is Margaret. I'm 68 years old, and this is the story of how staying silent became the loudest thing I ever did, and how the truth, once it started coming out, refused to stop. My husband died when our son Ethan was 10. Heart attack, no warning, gone before the ambulance arrived. I remember standing in the kitchen that morning, holding a coffee mug that was still warm, and thinking it's just us now. So I worked 2 jobs some years. I skipped vacations, skipped new clothes, skipped almost everything, so that Ethan could go to a good university and never once feel like he was behind anyone else. When he met Olivia, I was thrilled. She was sharp, funny, ambitious. At their wedding, I cried the whole way through the vows, and I meant every tear. For their first home, I told them I wanted to give them the down payment as a wedding gift. What I didn't tell them was that it emptied almost everything I had saved across 4 decades of work. I didn't tell them because I didn't want gratitude. I wanted them to feel stable. There's a difference. A year later, Ethan's small business hit a rough patch. He never asked me for help. He was too proud for that, so I didn't wait to be asked. I quietly set up automatic payments for their mortgage, their electricity, their internet, their insurance. I paid for groceries and told Olivia I'd found a great sale, week after week, for 6 years. Every time Ethan told a friend how well he was doing, how stable his little family was, I just smiled and said nothing. I didn't need credit. I needed him to be okay. I had no idea I was building the very rope that would later be used to hang me. Here's the thing nobody warns you about when you give without asking for anything back. Some people start to resent you for it anyway. Olivia began changing. Small things at first. She'd go quiet when I walked in the room. She'd change the subject when Ethan brought me up. Then the small things became stories. She told Ethan I'd criticized her cooking. I hadn't. She told him I'd gone through their bedroom during a visit, looking for something I hadn't. She told him I was trying to control how they'd raise my grandson before he was even born. Every time Ethan questioned one of these stories, Olivia cried. And every time she cried, Ethan stopped asking questions. I watched my son slowly get trained, one tear at a time, to believe his wife over his own memory of his own mother. Phone calls got shorter. Dinners stopped happening. My grandson was suddenly always napping or at a friend's whenever I asked to visit. There was one strange moment, looking back, that I brushed off at the time. Olivia's college roommate ran into me at the grocery store, and when she found out who I was, her face changed completely. She started to say something, "Wait, you're Ethan's mother? Does he know about?" and then stopped herself, laughed nervously, and said, "Never mind. Wrong person." I thought about it for maybe a day. Then I let it go. I told myself truth always wins in the end. Just keep loving them. Keep paying quietly. Don't make this a war. I was about to learn how wrong that could be in more ways than one. It was a Tuesday when Olivia called me, voice trembling, asking me to come over for what she called a family talk. I should have known something was wrong when I walked in and saw the whole family already seated. Ethan's aunt, his cousins, even neighbors I barely knew. Olivia stood up first. "My anniversary bracelet is missing," she said. "The diamond one Ethan bought me. I've looked everywhere. The only person who's been in our house recently is Margaret." I felt the floor tilt under me. "I never touched your bracelet, Olivia." She didn't even look at me. She looked at Ethan. And Ethan, my son, the boy I raised alone, the boy whose tuition I paid for by skipping my own meals some months, didn't ask me a single question. He didn't check the house. He didn't ask when I'd last been inside their bedroom. He exploded. 6 years of quietly swallowed resentment came pouring out of him in one furious breath. He called me controlling, manipulative, a burden on his marriage. He said things I won't repeat here, things that came from Olivia's mouth long before they ever came from his. Then he pointed at the front door. "Pack your bags and get out." Nobody in that room said a word in my defense. Not one person. So I stood up. I walked upstairs. I packed exactly one suitcase. And before I left, I set a sealed envelope on the kitchen table. "I hope you never have to open this," I told him. He shoved it back across the table without even looking at it. "I don't want anything from you." I looked at my son for a long moment. Then I said the only thing I had left. "You will." And I walked out of that house for what I believed, at the time, might be the last time in my life. People assume that when someone humiliates you like that, you fight back loudly. You scream. You sue. You tell everyone what really happened. I didn't do any of that. When I got back to my apartment that night, I made 3 phone calls: my bank, my mortgage servicer, my insurance company. One by one, I canceled every automatic payment I'd been quietly sending to my son's household for 6 straight years. Then I did the hardest thing of all. I did nothing else. I didn't call to check on them. I didn't explain. I didn't warn them. I just let go of a rope I'd been holding for 6 years without them ever knowing it existed. For almost a month, nothing happened. Bills have a delay built into them, a grace period most people never notice because they've never needed it. I heard through a cousin that Olivia was telling people, "See? We never needed her anyway." Then the grace period ran out, and it ran out faster than it should have. The mortgage payment bounced. A red notice showed up taped to the front door about the electricity. The water got shut off on a Thursday, and Olivia reportedly had to shower at a neighbor's house. The internet died midweek, and on a Tuesday morning, while Ethan was at work, a tow truck backed up his driveway and repossessed the SUV he'd been so proud of. What confused Ethan, what he told me confused him most. Later was how fast it all fell apart. I had only been paying 5 specific bills. Losing 5 bills shouldn't collapse an entire household in 3 weeks. There should have been savings to lean on, a cushion, something. There wasn't. For the first time in his adult life, Ethan sat down and opened every single financial document in that house. And that's when he found the first impossible thing. None of the payments, not one, in 6 years had ever come from his account, or Olivia's. Every single payment had come from one account. Mine. But that wasn't the only account with my name on it. Ethan didn't tell Olivia what he'd found. Instead, quietly the same way I'd once quietly paid his bills, he hired a private investigator. It took 9 days. The investigator's report started with something simple. Olivia's maiden name wasn't the one on their marriage certificate. She'd been married once before, briefly in another state, under a name she'd legally changed after the divorce. Ethan had known vaguely that she'd had a difficult first marriage. He had never known the details, because every time he asked, she cried, and he stopped asking. The same pattern. Always the same pattern. The investigator tracked down her first mother-in-law, a woman named Diane. Diane's story was almost identical to mine. She had helped support her son's household quietly for years. She had been accused, out of nowhere, of stealing a piece of jewelry during a family gathering. She had been thrown out of her son's life in front of relatives who never once asked a single question. And Diane, unlike me, had no pension left, no savings, nowhere to land. She had died 2 years later, alone, in a state-assisted facility, having never spoken to her son again. Olivia had watched it happen. Olivia had engineered it happening. And when it worked once, she filed it away as a plan. A method: isolate the mother, drain what's left of her usefulness, control the narrative, control the money, and if the mother has nothing left to give, discard her completely. I wasn't an accident. I was a repeat performance. And the mystery credit card, the one opened 4 years into my son's marriage, the investigator traced the cash advances to a private account Olivia had opened under yet another name and exit fund, built slowly, quietly, in case she ever needed to disappear with money that couldn't be traced back to Ethan's accounts or mine in a divorce. She hadn't just been planning to isolate me. She'd been planning to leave eventually, on her own terms, with a cushion neither Ethan nor I would ever know existed. The bracelet accusation wasn't really about the bracelet. It was about buying time, getting me out of the house before I noticed the credit card statement that had, by sheer bad luck, almost arrived at my apartment that same month. Ethan confronted her with all of it in one sitting. The bracelet, sitting the whole time at the bottom of her own suitcase. The recovered text messages where she'd scripted exactly what lie to tell him, and when the doorbell footage proving I hadn't been anywhere near their house on the day she claimed I'd taken the bracelet. And now, the credit card. Diane. The exit fund. I expected her to break down. I expected an apology, even a fake one. She didn't give him either. Instead, she looked at my son and told him it was his fault for being so easy to manage. She told him that if he'd ever once stood up to his mother, none of this would have been necessary. She said Diane had been the same kind of woman I was controlling, clingy, unable to let her son build his own life, and that some mothers simply needed to be removed for a marriage to survive. Then, when Ethan told her he was calling the bank to report the fraud and going to the police about the identity theft, Olivia did the one thing that finally, completely ended any doubt in his mind. She threatened him. She said if he went to the police, she'd tell them I had authorized the card myself years ago, that I'd forgotten about it in my old age, that I was getting confused, that a judge would believe a frightened young wife over a bitter old mother-in-law with a grudge. She said she still had friends who'd testify I'd been erratic, controlling, unstable. She was already building her next story before the first one had even finished collapsing. That night, for the first time, my son was afraid of his own wife. Here's the part that still gives me chills when I think about it. Olivia didn't know that the investigators report Diane's story, the exit fund. The fraudulent card was already sitting in a folder with a lawyer's letterhead on it. She didn't know Ethan had already filed a report with the bank's fraud division, with documentation, before he ever confronted her. 2 days after she threatened him, a detective called our house, not to question me, to question her. The fraud investigation didn't stop at the credit card. Once the bank pulled the full account history, they found the same pattern repeated across 3 other names, small, careful, plausible deniability amounts, moved between accounts that all eventually funneled into the same private fund. One of those names belonged to Diane. Olivia had been quietly siphoning money from her first mother-in-law, too, years before she ever met Ethan. Diane hadn't just lost her family. She'd lost thousands of dollars, nobody ever traced back to its source, because nobody was looking, because everybody believed the story that she was the problem. When Olivia realized the walls were closing in, she didn't wait for an arrest. She emptied what she could from the exit fund, packed 2 suitcases of her own, and was gone before the weekend was over. No note, no warning, not even to Ethan, the last anyone in the family heard. She'd crossed state lines. The detective told Ethan that finding her would take time. If it happened at all, these cases often do. People like Olivia are good at exactly one thing above all others: disappearing the moment the story stops working in their favor. Ethan filed for divorce in absentia. Most of the family had already stopped speaking to Olivia weeks earlier, but now there was no question left to argue about. The house went up for sale. The SUV was long gone. What remained of the comfortable life Olivia had built her lies around turned out to be almost nothing at all. A shell held up by my quiet payments and her hidden theft, propping up an image for people who were never really looking that closely to begin with. Ethan called me every week during those months. I answered, but I kept the conversations short. Not out of cruelty, I simply wasn't ready yet, and I've never believed in performing forgiveness before I actually feel it. He asked me once, quietly, whether I'd known. Not about the bracelet, about Diane. Had I ever suspected Olivia had done this before? I told him the truth: no, I had no idea I wasn't the first. I had simply done what I always do, which is keep loving people quietly and hope it's enough to outlast whatever is working against it. It wasn't enough to stop what happened, but it was enough to survive it. When Ethan finally came to see me in person, not to search, this time just to visit, because by then I'd given him my new address myself, he expected, I think, to find a lonely old woman rebuilding her life from nothing. That is not what he found. He found a small cottage near the ocean, paid for with the very pension money I'd spent 6 years quietly pouring into his mortgage instead. plus a modest settlement from the bank. Once the fraud investigation confirmed, I'd never authorized that credit card at all. He found me volunteering 3 mornings a week at the local children's library. He found a woman with actual friends, actual trips planned, actual laughter in her life for the first time since she'd become a widow almost 40 years earlier. He sat across from me at my kitchen table, a different kitchen table than the one where I'd once left an envelope. He refused to touch, and he didn't ask me to come home this time. He asked me if I would let him start over, slowly, actually asking questions this time, instead of believing whoever cried the loudest. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said. "I let a story about you replace 6 years of actually knowing you, and I don't think I can ever fully make up for that." I looked at my son, the boy I raised alone, the man who let his wife's lies outweigh 68 years of a mother's love, and who, when the truth finally reached him, chased it all the way down, even when it cost him almost everything he had left. "I spent years making your house feel like a home. Ethan," I told him, "I'm not ready to do that again overnight, but I'm willing to let you visit the one I built for myself. That's a start." He nodded, and for the first time in over a year, he actually smiled. People ask me sometimes if I've forgiven him. The honest answer is mostly, it came slower than either of us wanted, but it came once I watched him do the work instead of just asking for the outcome. Olivia was never found, as far as I know. Somewhere out there, she's likely already looking for the next family to slip quietly into, the next mother-in-law to isolate, the next name to borrow for an account nobody's watching. I think about Diane sometimes, and wish I'd known her story before it became a warning for mine. What I've learned, if there's a lesson in any of this, is that love that has to hide itself to survive isn't really being protected. It's being spent without anyone ever knowing its price. I paid that price gladly for 6 years. I just wish, before my son ever pointed at that door, that he'd asked me one single question, instead of believing the loudest voice in the room. He knows the whole truth now, all of it. Whether that's enough to rebuild what we lost, that part of the story is still being written, one visit at a time.